My name is Kuyasha Media, and this is the Young Catalyst Conversations. We're so happy that you could join us once again. And right off the bat, before we start, I really just want to say thank you so much for the love that you guys have been showing us on social media. You know, we've noticed how you guys have been sharing the episodes that we've had. Some of you guys have been messaging us just to say, how can we get involved? We love what you're doing. You're encouraging us. So please keep on sharing. You never know who's on your timeline, who could benefit from these kinds of conversations. So please just keep on sharing. Right, so back to today's conversation. Today we are talking about finance. And no, there isn't some big application form, you know, hidden behind everyone here that we're going to put out and tell you tick here, tick there. This is more of a conceptual discussion. This is more about, you know, really just helping you to understand that whenever people are talking about finance and how it's such a problem, you can't afford your petrol now, you know, and VAT and all these other things. And you want to fund your business and you want to fund your studies, you know. What are people talking about, right? Because I think we can recognize that whenever we're talking about finance, it's always addressing it as a challenge. And on my panel today, I have a lot of experts. They won't want to admit it because they're quite humble and modest, which I think is quite overrated. But they have a lot of experience, especially when it comes to, you know, the issues of financing within the context of entrepreneurship and small businesses. So enough about that. Let me just get right to introducing them. So first here, the man with the $1 million smile. I've got Kuyasha Media, and he is the CEO of the People's Fund. Very, very exciting work that they are doing in terms of really trying to address the issues of entrepreneurship and doing it in a more innovative way, doing it with collaboration. And you know, later on, if we've got some time, we'll actually just give him an opportunity to share more about what they're doing. Then I have Altaf Abo. I hope I pronounced his name right, but I think I did. He is the associate principal at Edge Growth. Also do very, very exciting work. Once again, another game changer within a South African context, and he is an expert in his field. So yes, we're happy to have him on the panelists as well. And then on my far left, I've got Nicole Martins, and she's the head of the United Nations Principles for Responsible Investing. Very, very exciting initiative. I know I'm going to say very exciting initiative a lot today, but it really is. You know, we have a really, really exciting panel. So she's the head of the United Nations Principles for Responsible Investing. Very exciting work as well in terms of them really just going out there and in their own way being activists for trying to garner investments for growth. And then right at the end, finally, we've got Brendan Martins, and he is the SMME development lead at the Youth Employment Service. So yes, he also will work in terms of like small businesses. He has a lot of experience in terms of helping startups, helping startups with scaling. So yeah, very, very exciting. Welcome, guys.
Thank you. Thanks.
Very, very excited to have you. All right. So first off, it's always ladies first. You should have prepared yourself for that one. Nicole, maybe you want to just, you know, kick us off by sharing more about what do you do and why you're passionate about it, and you know, like why you're here. Just share it with the audience there. Sure.
Great. So the first thing I have to just do is just make one correction, is that I don't head the entire UNPRI, just the Africa and Middle East part. So you gave me a promotion there, but it's fine. And what we do at the Principles for Responsible Investment is we're an investor-led association. So from the side of where the finance comes from, and we give big funds and asset managers and service providers in that space an opportunity to sign up to voluntary principles that help them to make more responsible investments. So to take the environmental, the social, and the governance factors that what we traditionally call the non-financials, and integrate that into their investment. Because what we're seeing more and more, and what your topic will touch on, I'm sure, through the discussion, is that nothing actually is non-financial. In the long run, everything has a cost, and you'll pay for it later if you don't think about it now. So why I love what I do is because we're genuinely changing the face of finance internationally. Right now, PRI has more than 2,100 signatories around the world, representing more than $83 trillion in assets under management. And it's a really good feeling to know that that $83 trillion is responsibly invested and managed in a way that takes these things into account.
Okay, that's perfect. I love how you touch on, you changing the face of finance. And I think by us having these balls and everyone here looks young, everyone's fresh, we really are going to change the face of finance, because it's really seen as like this, people in an ivory tower in like, suits and a tie and strict and all that stuff. But really, it's something that affects you. And maybe at TAF, you can also just, touch on, what you do, why you love it, that kind of thing, yeah.
Sure. So I think to be in our space, you have to have some passion for it, some passion for the economy, the country, and also that upliftment of everyone. Interestingly enough, the way we see it is what we do is impact investments. So predominantly what we like to do is make commercial, profitable investments where there's also a measurable non-financial impact. We've been focusing on job creation for the last 5 years. That's been one of the big key topics in South Africa. We also look at other metrics, being in health, education, and that shows through our portfolio. So we've made multiple investments in those spaces, looking to, whenever we make returns for our clients, also have that social impact.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's that measurement of both which makes it sustainable.
Right, perfect. So with Brandon and Leanna, I'm not going to ask you guys to share your screen, not because I don't think it's important, but I think I just want us to really get straight into the crux of the conversation today. SMMEs, entrepreneurship, those words are thrown around quite a lot. The president has come out, and I think a lot of people have also come out to say that entrepreneurship, small businesses, this is how we're going to try drive change in our country, but we don't see it. And whenever you don't see it, people say there's no financing. But what do you guys think, in your experience, what is the issue? Is it an entrepreneurial culture issue, or is it really a financing issue, such that, if the guys who are bringing the money don't see that much of a return, right, to Altaf's point of saying that, okay, there also needs to be a social return. If they're not interested in saying, okay, we want to make sure that there's a social return and an economic return, is it that problem? Is that financing the problem? Or are you finding in your experience that really just entrepreneurship within the country is it's not there?
Sure. So I'll start. So with our background, we came into this industry, just a little bit of background. We fund SMMEs through crowdfunding, but we do it in a way that that it has a return. So the crowd would give the entrepreneurs some capital to fund their assets, and then they pay a return back over a period of time. Then we structure deals in that way. And what we found is we had an assumption that the problem is a lack of funding. 15 months in the game, and we're definitely 100% sure there's no shortage of capital. There's a shortage of fundable businesses. That's actually the biggest problem in the country. I think entrepreneurship is being taught wrong, and it scares me that government has delegated entrepreneurship development through corporate spending and that sort of thing, that the income divide is increasing across the races in the country, and also the education in entrepreneurship is getting worse and worse. What people consider what they need to know. Most entrepreneurs who try to apply on our platform have no understanding of accounting, right? Basic understanding of accounting, and you always ask the question, how do you expect to grow a business just on PR? Because the lifeblood of a business is actually its financial. So I think the education element in entrepreneurship needs to change. And we need to stop glamorizing entrepreneurship, I think that's a big problem. Entrepreneurship, like the entrepreneurs I back, personally, are the people selling oranges on the street corner, are these plaza shop owners. They run the economy, like the majority of the economy is just not concentrated into a single effort. And probably needs to be scaled and collaboratively worked together so that you can deliver some value. But that's not glamorous, that's hard work, but it moves the economy. And I think we need to get into more of that and less of the fancy stuff, There's this new wave in entrepreneurship, especially in South Africa, actually in all industries, of the fourth industrial revolution and how we need, and I'm like, no, let's solve problems as problems exist, Technology is an enabler, it's not an industry on its own, and I think we need to start changing our thinking around that.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think, as Yes, we take quite a significant view from an ecosystem approach. Right? So as Yes, we are trying to build entire new industries, entire new spaces. And when you look at the ecosystem of entrepreneurship in South Africa, some of your three biggest challenges, the first one and the biggest one, is access to startup skills for an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs do not have, and it speaks to your point, they do not understand what it means to play in this entrepreneurial space. They do not have access to the right skill set in order to execute their business models. The second element is access to finance. So that is the second biggest one that is a problem. But it's not a lack of capital in the market. It's a lack of understanding how to access that at one level. And the second level is a lack of innovative products that are driving capital into different markets. And the third component and this is all research from the JEDI report released at the Global Entrepreneurship Congress last year. The third element is access or absorption of disruptive digital technology. So your spaza shop owners are not utilizing digital technology to grow their access to market, grow their opportunities to access new suppliers and all the rest of it. So what we are doing is we are trying to play across those three priority elements when it comes to building an ecosystem. In Europe, about 90% of the businesses in that ecosystem employ 1 to 8 employees. South Africa, we're sitting on about 58%. So there's a massive gap and a massive amount of industrial concentration that's happening in our market. And because of those three elements, we're not seeing that gap closing. We're seeing that gap either staying stagnant or actually reversing. So what we're trying to do is drive through unlocking youth unemployment, unlocking the ability of opportunities to place youth into small businesses that can help them understand how to start accessing markets. I mean, at a practical level, if we have a youth, an unemployed, diplomaed youth in bookkeeping, and we have a spaza shop that does not know how to track its financials, there's a mismatch there. And our objective is to take that unemployed graduate, that unemployed youth, place them into a spaza shop so they can start tracking, building the financials of the business, capturing those financials, and then that business can start accessing financial opportunities. You couple that with some disruptive technology, your Google digital skills programs, and that spaza shop that youth can start building a social media presence for that owner. And so those are the things that we're doing to try and address it at an ecosystem level, so that you have better businesses to fund, and that they can start accessing the more formalized financial market. But I do feel that there needs to be more innovation from the capital markets around how they actually speak to the different markets in this country.
Okay. Two things that have come out from just your responses and Leander, and I think it's just this whole thing of quite a lot of the work that needs to be done to lift South Africa out of the situation that it currently is in is being assigned to corporates. Government, and I'm just going to use the blanket word government, it's looking to corporate to drive employment, it's looking to corporate to drive entrepreneurship, and what you guys are saying is it doesn't work. But what then does work? What best practice have you guys observed? Primarily, I don't know if you have some best practice that you've observed over the continent, and I open this up to everyone in terms of, what is your experience been to say that, okay, in South Africa, this is how it is currently being done. We are leaving everything in the hands of the big, JSE companies and so forth, but actually how we are going to drive change on this country is through small businesses, entrepreneurship, and social and innovative financing. So best practices, what have you guys come through? Yeah.
I mean, I think it's not about saying to the big companies that you're not correct in being part of the solution to this entrepreneurship crisis. I mean, we have, and I call it a crisis because we are at really low levels of entrepreneurial activity in this country, despite the massive amount of potential. But it's really about the approach that a corporate is executing their interventions. And we're talking about enterprise development, supplier development. They typically don't take an inclusive business model when doing this. It's a tick boxing exercise. And it's really about saying to a corporate, you need to shift your understanding of this context. You need to shift it away from just tick boxing. I've now spent all my enterprise development money by giving a single supplier an interest-free loan. That doesn't drive change. So what we're doing and what we're saying is yes, and when we engage with our clients, and our clients are in the JSE Top 100, is how do we utilize your BEE spend as an innovation budget that you can start to invest in businesses that disrupt the market, disrupt the small business space, and then give the opportunity for entrepreneurs to take the opportunity and drive it. As the business, you provide the space, the entrepreneur provides the impetus to drive it.
Anything you guys want to add to
Oh,
that?
and I could add to that. I think just on the last 2 points, adding to what other panelists have mentioned, is that we work predominantly with SMEs. We also do a lot of funding which is provided through ESD initiatives into our capital funds, and our attempt is always to hit those multiple metrics where you're looking for those kind of businesses. So those great businesses that are growing, that are profitable, but also have a social impact. And like they mentioned, we have not a lack of funding, because you can always find and access more funding, but rather a lack of good businesses. So what we see often time and time again is that there's a lot of money chasing very few small businesses or good businesses, and there's no capital for the majority of businesses. And that is not actually a South African issue, it's an international or global thing, where there's a small percentage of businesses in the SME space that will make it and grow. And that's also, I think, an understanding of entrepreneurship, where it's a low percentage game. You just need to keep going and have that grit and sometimes that little bit of luck to make it. And I think there's been historically, I think even South Africa historically and currently, we have a view of looking to the government for answers. And often the answers with, like, it's hard, it's tough, it takes time, and it's a cultural shift where you have to understand that if you go out there and do your best, you just might not get it this time. You might have to do your best multiple times to almost achieve that success in the end.
And just, if I can add on to that, I think the idea is also this idea of innovation and, you know, supporting new ideas and things. That's something that's very difficult in a sort of very structured and antiquated regulatory environment. And so when you use that blanket term of government, for example, the national development agenda that we've got doesn't always foster that kind of innovation. So for example, in the States now, currently, job creation in the installation of solar PV panels is growing 9 times faster than job creation in any other sector, right? And they had to start somewhere. So someone had to start up once, and the regulatory environment there fosters venture capital. There's a different risk appetite, and it's a different environment that allows you to take that risk, right? A different attitude towards entrepreneurs and culture, and it's sort of, well, let's give it a go and see. Where here, you don't really have that luxury, because especially if it's your ED spend or your supply chain development spend, you don't want to take that risk, right? So because you needed something to happen. So I think it's a lot of things. It's a systemic sort of problem that everything needs to work together, and we need to have an understanding of the context in which you play. And as an entrepreneur, I imagine, so I'm not an entrepreneur, but I would just say, as an entrepreneur, you have to have a really good understanding of the space in which you play, so that you understand what you're pitching to who and in what context before you can really just jump into it.
You've been dying.
Yeah. There's a few things that came up from what the panelists are saying, which I find quite interesting. I think I totally agree. It's a culture thing for the country, right? Where are we sourcing our entrepreneurs from? How are they being trained and all of that? But I also think we tend to forget what kind of country we're in, right? And we're looking for solutions to our country from places where it's affluent countries like America, like the UK, etc. And I think South Africa should be more following models of countries where there was a huge income divide and they started decreasing it, all right? For example, is it South Korea? South Korea is a good example. China is also a good example. And the objectives that they took was, you know what, we need to find our core competency, where our strength is, export that to the world and grow the economy internally. Then once we have a level of comfort, then we start creating better products than everyone else in different industries, right? And why I'm saying this is because, I mean, South Africa has a terrible unemployment rate like we're discussing. And there are industries that can absorb that, right? for example, agriculture produces some of the cheapest jobs in the world. The cost of investment in order to churn out a job, I think, is like 8,000 Rand per job, compared to the rest of the economy where you're looking at 250K investment for each job created. And our solutions can be innovative in our thinking, not in the technology. And this is where I'm trying to get at is, for example, like you were mentioning the spaza example. So there is a big drive to digitize spazas, right? Now, I come from the spaza environment. I see the spending patterns of people, right? And I go, no, it's like there's this meme that I saw a while ago where some doctors came in and was like, oh yeah, this app is going to enable you to find water at the best reserve and this and this. And these ladies are carrying water buckets on their head. And they were like, is it going to make the load of the water lighter? And I think we're not going into the communities to understand what the communities actually need. And we're imposing solutions that come from somewhere else and going, this will work. And what I'm trying to get at is that's not how we should be thinking about innovation, like from my perspective. How we should be thinking about innovation, you're absolutely correct. We need to get an accounting student or intern into there so that they can access greater forms of financing so that their stock price, the cost of stocking can come down and they can expand. They need to collaborate collectively so that they're buying as a single collective so that they have a warehousing that can enable them to get the stock down. But I don't think it's the same way as how America advanced digitally, you know, and we need to move away from that. And on the corporate side, like you probably know this better than anyone, right? ESD is a box ticking exercise.
Like you said,
it's a cost center. It's not core to business. And how we need to rethink it is how we present ESD as a profitable center for doing business. That's some of the things that, for example, that we do. We're going, no, you can make it very profitable to do ESD. By taking an entrepreneur, developing them, putting them in your supply chain, but also financing, like you were saying, financing their purchase orders. Because this is what entrepreneurs are learning, the very tough lesson as they're growing. Like, cash is king. You can discuss all other things. If you can't have cash to grow your business and actually execute, you can't do that. And that's the gap we're trying to fill. But we're filling it from the entrepreneur's perspective and also trying to step into the corporate discussion. And last point, sorry, I know I've been talking long. South Africa has an entrepreneurship re-entry rate of 1.1, if I'm not mistaken. So if you fail once, you're unlikely to go back into entrepreneurship. America has a re-entry rate of 7. So if you fail once, you come back 6 times until you come to a point where you've developed the skills to actually run a business. Entrepreneurship is a failure teacher. It's not, school is structured wrong globally, not just South Africa, for entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship, you get better the more you fail. Right?
First attempt in learning.
Exactly, right? You get better the more you fail, and we need to change the culture of going, what was he thinking? Like, and it's a South African culture, you know, like, what was she thinking she can start a business? What was she? And that shame needs to move. Now, that's the non-financials that we're discussing, right?
Yeah.
If we can shift those cultural metrics, then I think we'd go a long way. And then, like you're saying, it's an ecosystem. It's not just government. It's not just corporate. It's not just the entrepreneurs. It's collectively having a single mission. And it goes back to whose examples are we following? For example, I think in South Korea, they used to arrest people if they sold their cars for too long in the same country, right? They told them, your mission is to export these cars to the rest of the world so that you can grow our GDP. If we're seeing that you're making most of your profit from the country, we're shutting you down, you know? And that's the thinking we need to have, is that how do we grow the economy and grow the employment rate? Because then people can't think when they're poor. There's a study that showed that people can't think when they're hungry.
Yeah.
So we'll discuss innovation until we're tired, until we feed the base. I mean, we're dealing with a 50% poverty rate in the country. Let's fix that. Let's absorb them in industries that are cheap to develop those jobs and then grow from there.
Your passion is just so evident. But that's great. You know, we need passion to solve some of these issues. So when I initially framed when I conceptualized what this panel discussion is going to be about, I was like, it's going to be about finance. But based on everything that, you know, all 4 of you have said here, it's not really a finance issue. It's more of, let's actually get people ready to be able to absorb the finance that is there. Now, the second thing I want to move to is, you know, you guys have already touched on it, the interlinks with the international community. Now, this is a big thing in South Africa's context because we are heavily, whether people like it or not, we are heavily, let me look at the camera, we are heavily reliant on foreign investment, you know, on foreign portfolio flows. what do you guys think? Like, you know, as I thought about this, I didn't even know how to frame the question, because it's such a big thing for us in that we are linked to the global economy, and therefore what they think does matter. What does that mean for us as we come up with all these amazing ideas of we want to develop a core skill and then export that? Are we going to be able to do that in the context of the fact that we have outsiders looking in? And there's so much, but I just want to hear, like, what do you, Alta, if you've already, do you want to just jump in?
Yeah, so I can start off, maybe almost bridging the last concept to this one in looking at the international economy, looking at best practices and understanding those cash flows. So I mean, as my fellow panelists mentioned, looking at the economies that have done best. So you look at China, India, Brazil, where they've uplifted millions of people out of poverty. I mean, they single-handedly have enabled us to reach the UN targets, the Millennium Development Goals of decreasing poverty by doing certain things and looking at what is the key things that they've done the same. Some things that they've done, and as you mentioned, is opening up their economies to international flows. So they've opened up their economies and they've liberalized their rules at home. Looking at South Africa particularly, we see that we've actually fallen in global standards of ease of doing business. And if we are fighting and saying we need entrepreneurship, that should be one of the key factors that we should be chasing. We should make it easier to be entrepreneurs, easier to fail multiple times. It should be easier to hire people, easier to restructure your business, easier to liquidate also, because those things come hand in hand. Because you're scared to leave your business, you can't liquidate if there's no second chance. I think those are the key factors. And when you talk about international flows, I think it's almost using an example of an employee in the business. Those international flows are almost a bonus that comes into the company. And if you take the typical worker, he works for his company for a year, he behaves well, he does a good job, and his business does well, then he gets a bonus at the end of the year. And in the same way, South Africa needs to continuously behave well to achieve that, and the economy, the international economy, has to do well at the same time for those flows to come in. So sometimes it's a long-term reputation game where you continuously have to hit those metrics, make it easier in the long term, and prevent the short-term thinking of how do we solve things today, thinking how do we change the structures to make it more open, make it easier for global businesses to invest locally, and make it easier for us to export as well.
Before you guys respond, Nicole, I see you also want to jump in. You say it's a long-term reputation and that's the name of the game. But Nicole and anyone else, for me, I want to ask, is it a fair game? Is it fair, this game that's being played? What's your opinion?
Okay, so that's an interesting question about whether or not it's fair or not, and I think that rests on whatever your particular value system is, so different people will have different responses to that.
That's true, yeah.
What I will say is that the financial system as we have it at the moment, the system of capitalism and the way that the investment world works, which is that investment will always seek growth and it will always seek the highest possible return, right? That is fair because it's not subjective, right? It only knows one way to work. What is great is that we've moved from a period of thinking that you pursue that return at all costs and that nothing else matters to a much more enlightened approach to say, oh, but the way that I get this highest possible long-term return is by taking into account everything else in that, to make sure that it's sustainable over time.
Yes.
And when you think about the institutional and the global investment landscape, right? The largest investors that we have in the world are institutional investors like pension funds. Pension funds are the largest investors globally. And a pension fund by nature has a 30-year time horizon. It's not looking for what's the best return I can get this quarter or next quarter, even in 3 or 5 years. It should always be thinking, what's going to give me the best long-term return? And when it comes to, as a country, managing the traction that we have for that pool that we have as a country, that's where we need to be thinking. So South Africa is in an interesting position because our regulatory environment as it stands is that our pension funds have to invest 75% of their funds in South African companies locally. So that means that you have the JSE and that's pretty much it, because you have a very small proportion that you're allowed to invest in unlisted companies, so any of your smaller companies that you might think you'd like to grow. So that sort of limits us in that sense. but our institutional investors that come from outside can put their money wherever they want to, right?
Yeah.
So there's an opportunity there. But what we're also seeing, and through the work that we're doing with the PRI, is that internationally, the trend is shifting towards people, much like Edge Growth, is saying, not only do I want a financial return, but there's two things to that. The first part is that I want to make sure that this is the best possible financial return I'm going to get, not just this year, but 30 years from now. And that means I'm looking at not just what does your business look like now, I'm looking at what is that industry going to look like in 20 years. Is it even worth me considering this? Am I going to invest in an oil and gas company or in a fossil fuel based car company now when California's just said that by 2045 they're going to be fossil free zero? No, because nobody there can buy that car, right? So if you're part of that value chain, which we are, that's what you need to be thinking about. If you're creating that long-term impression, you have to be thinking, if I'm not going to be able to participate in a global market because of the way the world is shifting, then you need to start thinking about the point of, well, maybe we need to be looking more inward. And that's exactly why the conversations about developmental investment and prescribed assets are starting to bubble up again, because people are thinking, well, maybe we shouldn't be relying on this other money, and we should use our money for us. Which has positives and negatives and is a whole other debate. But it's just, that's sort of the approach that you can take. We're all connected, we're part of this global investment universe. The trend is that people want more bang for their buck. They want more than just a financial return. They want to know that it's a financial return that's going to be sustainable, and increasingly, as an aside, what is the impact you're creating?
Yeah, that was, I think we've touched on some points, but we have a conversation offline as well, just mindful of time. But before we, we leave, I just want us to touch on the SDGs. Altaf, you already mentioned that, China and India, they've done a lot in terms of helping us globally achieve the Millennium Development Goals. And now we've got the SDGs, and that's been coming up a lot on social media. It's been coming up a lot, on various platforms. A lot of people becoming investors, a lot of influencers becoming ambassadors, for the SDGs and so forth. So I just want to ask, for you guys, what do you think about them? And I think as a parting shot, you can just maybe say, okay, this is what I think about them, this is why I like them, this is what I don't like. I think they work, I think they won't work. So you can maybe just, leave us with your thoughts on that.
Can I maybe start just because as a UN affiliated association, we are all in favor of the Sustainable Development Goals. And it's a big part of what we do. And we're actually working at the moment on, because in the last, let's say probably in the last year, we've had a lot of interest from signatories around the world, so big funds and asset managers that are asking us, where should the SDGs fit in my investment universe? How much attention should I be giving these things? If I'd like to measure the impact that my investments are having at this level, where do I even start? How do I decide which SDGs are most material for my market or my investors? So we've had a lot of questions about that. So PRI as an association is working with the Global Reporting Initiative and the United Nations Global Compact on producing what we would consider to be a standardized framework for measurement. So to say, so that depending on which of the SDGs are the most material in your context, you know where to even start. So I think from my perspective and from PRI's perspective, the SDGs, we're all in favor of it, we support it, we accept that they are a globally acknowledged set of best practice, aspirations. But we also acknowledge that to date, the guidance that's been given on how to actually go about getting there has not been great. So we're currently working on trying to help, at least from an investor perspective, to help give some guidance on, well, where do these things fit and how do you even start to measure what difference you're making.
Anyone else on the panel?
Anyone else?
Cool, I can pick it up from there. Why not? Yes, I mean, just looking at those goals as a whole, I think they're extremely laudable targets. I think they can be wide-reaching and sometimes overwhelming in many senses. And I think that's the one concern I have with them, is that you often have to decide for yourself, either as a business, as an economy, as a country, or as a culture, as to what is your focus. And to me, focusing on certain key ones, like reducing poverty, is a massive one, because this improves education, it improves healthcare, it improves women's equality. I mean, all of those things can be seen in countries that have come. So I mean, using the BRICS as a good example of all of them, as they've increased in those areas in reducing poverty, they also had all of those other social targets met. And I think that's a key thing for us, and maybe like you mentioned, understanding how we can bring those in, and the key ones which will have almost move the needle the most. And to me, I mean, poverty is a big one. We focus heavily on that, and in our sense, reducing unemployment is the single biggest way you can do that.
Yeah.
I'm actually in full agreement with what you're saying and the knock-on effects of reducing something like poverty. For example, most people don't realize you increase the poverty rate in a country, or rather the income inequality, you increase the violence rate, you increase obviously the crime rate and all of those other things. So as a starting point, I think most of our problems are economic, in the sense that people don't have access to the economic means. And then there's the broader problems like sustainability of how we're utilizing the resources of the earth and that sort of thing. And I think if we increase the poverty and you automatically increase education, you also increase people's choices, individual choices. Like you mentioned, that the biggest finances, for example, are pension funds, right? And that's actually the thinking we have, is going, do you know, people just don't understand how much power they hold, right, as individuals, right? Because every single thing they look at that is built in the form of crowdfunding, right? Old Mutual owns most of Santon. That's an insurance company, right? The same with FNB, the same with the various other crowdfunding pension funds and things like that. And we're going, you can choose what matters to you. Because we had, as an example, we had a campaign for a beehive, right? A beekeeper. Native Norse. And we were selling the beehive to the market. The market would own the beehives, and then they'd earn 36 rand per kilo of honey sold from the thing, right? So it makes economic sense for them. But the bigger thing is, most people don't know, is that 1 in 4 spoons of food you put in your mouth is actually because of bees, because they're the biggest pollinators in the world. And South Africa, for example, imports almost 60% of our honey, even though we have the climate to grow, to make the best honey. And it's that sort of thinking that goes, if you make it economically viable and it's clean, you solve so many other things without even thinking about it. So, like you're saying, we're in full support because sustainability, it's useless. What are we doing? You know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the the Sustainable Development Goals, as they applied, was very in terms of South African context. It speaks to what's already been said, but it's driving down that poverty rate and driving down the inequality rate. Inequality is what leads to the tearing of social fabric in a big way. And if we can start to push down those rates, and it speaks again, that honey example is a perfect one. We're also working in that space to see how we can start doing import substitution. If we are starting to export more of the product we import, and we are attracting money back into the economy. And the way that we circulate it is making sure that it's into areas that are marginalized. And that immediately starts to create a change in your poverty rates and in your inequality rates. And all of the other things, yes, they do need the guidance and the framework to be able to get to the driving improved education, etc. But if you have the reduced poverty rates, those sort of become a lot easier to achieve than just us remaining with this massive issue.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. Really, really enjoyed this discussion. I really feel like you guys have really let your talent and your expertise shine through. And I really hope that, our audience, you'll really benefit from this, and I hope that you won't leave it here. Please just go and find out more about what they do. Go on the websites, visit social media pages, and also just take an initiative as well to just sit and think, what can you do to make a difference when it comes to these, massive issues we've been touching on, the poverty rate and the unemployment rate in this country? How can you contribute? How can you make a difference? It's already been raised a lot here that a single person can make a big difference. So really just think about, your talent, your abilities, and really think about how you can apply them to making another person's life better. Sharp, sharp. Always wanted to do that. Sharp, sharp. Sure.